Hello everyone and welcome back to our series of tutorials in learning to code with p5.js. Today in this video we will be talking about a very important fundamental concept in programming called arrays. In this video we will try to go through and figure out what arrays are, why do we need them, and how can we actually make use of them. So let's get started. All right, so one thing that I want to talk about, and this is something that I want to start off with, is that most of us would have played video games in some capacity, right? So either if it's like the simpler game as popping a balloon, or maybe some other fun game, which is like maze games such as Pac-Man. One of the things that's common in both of these are that there are multiple different elements inside. There are different sort of variables which are sort of at play, right? So think about it. We have created variables, so we know that. But if we have to create multiples of them, and then we need to understand very individual specific information we need to access, and we want to make that change over a period of time. So that in this case, if you look at it, we need to understand that there are so many different dots that need to be eaten. So that means that based on the position of the Pac-Man, either it is being eaten, that means it's visible or not visible. Where are the positions of each of these ghosts, and so on and so forth, right? So there's like a lot of dynamism that's happening. So in order to have a better control over different sort of variables, arrays are something that come in super handy. And that's what we are going to try and learn about it. So since we have worked with creating like single variable, think of arrays as the most useful way when we need to create variables in bulk, basically, right? So what it means is that, remember, variables are just holders, right? They're containers where we can actually assign sort of different values. So arrays are basically containers that can hold multiples and lots of values, right? If we look at the different sort of syntax and model that we have worked before, so think about it in a single variable model, we know that we can declare a variable. So in this case, we've called it x, right? But at this point in time, since we haven't assigned any sort of value, this is an empty variable. We can then, after declaring it in, let's say, first line, we can later on assign it a value as well. So in this case, let's say we have called it 10. So array is sort of similar in that context, where we create an array, which means that we declare an array, and we give it a name. So in this case, if we look at it, we have called, okay, let x be an array, which means that at this point in time, this is also an empty array, which can basically hold lots of variables. Length at this point is not defined, nor are the values assigned. So what makes us, what tells us that this is not a single variable but an array is this square bracket. So if you might have seen square brackets in some form of code, this is the syntax with which it is written. So wherever you see these square brackets, you would know that, we are working with array here. So let's just put in some variables inside this array, okay? In this case, we have put 5 variables, and each variable has been assigned a number, right? So the question here is that since array contains multiple variables, how do we access each different variable, right? So now that it has a variable which has a value 14, it also has a variable which has a value 73, but how do I tell it that, I want to access the 20, or I want to access 9, and I want to work with it? So we can access these by using indices. So what are indices is basically, it is like a counting system, index, right? So index is basically a counting system that helps us access these different variables. If you notice in this example that the index is starting from 0, that means that the first element in this index is 0, right? Why? Because the computer actually starts counting from 0, and this is a little bit different from how we count it. So this is something that we need to remember when we are creating variables, because it can sort of start getting mixed up with the length versus how we count them. So technically, if you look at it, these are 5 variables, But because it's not counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's starting from 0 all the way to 4. There are still 5 variables inside, except for that it's starting from 0 and ending at 4. All right, so few things that we need to keep in mind when we are talking about array is, first of all, that of course it has a name, which in this case we have given as x. Secondly, is the length of array. So in this case, it's 5, right? From 0 all the way to 4. And the counting system, which is the index. Important thing that for us to remember is the array index, right? Because this index is going to be super helpful for you, and I'm just going to share it in a bit. And the other important thing is basically whatever the values or the content that array holds, right? So these 4 are very important things. Index is something which is really helpful for us to actually point it to the right direction where we can access a specific value. So for instance, if I need to reach 20, how would I do that? By using the index number 1. But there is a certain format with which we can write or actually call the index element name, right? So these index basically are called element names, right? So how can we kind of write that? And now this is a syntactical thing that I just want you to remember. It has 3 important things. First is the name of the array itself. Then there are square brackets, and then there is the index number inside the square brackets. So what it is telling the program is that go to the array called x, and then it's pointing to the index number 2 or 4 or 0, whatever, so that you access that value. So let's say go to array x, and I'm pointing to the index number 2. That means that I can access value 73 and use it wherever I want to use it. It could be x position of circle or whatsoever, right? So this is an important thing for us to remember. If we think about it, or let's try to visualize it from an everyday example that we might see in our lives. So maybe this color palette could be a good example for us to sort of look at an array. So why? Because color palette, I think, is something that we have sort of worked with at some point in our lives or are still continuing to work with. So that would be an interesting metaphor. But this is not just one form of arrays. If you look around, there are multiple different examples that you can see. I mean, okay, this color palette basically contains colors, but then there are egg cartons, right, which can hold up to 6, 12, or 18 eggs. There are pill organizers. You can also think of them as arrays. Why? Because they are organized, let's say, depending on what kind of an organizer it is, it can have, array in terms of like different 7 days of the week, and you can organize pills. So, there are lots of different kind of arrays that we can see. And of course, there are so many different kind of values that it can hold, or in our language, right? So there are different elements. So in this case, this array, which is a palette, is holding some sort of colors. What we can see here is from the looks of it, right? Like we can count it, it has basically 14 colors. So let's try to see from the perspective of how we are organizing this information in our programming concept, right? So the name of this is palette, right? We have given it the name palette. We can see that there are 14 colors, but if we are doing indexing from the computer programming system, we are going to start from 0 and end at 13, which makes the total length of, or the number of colors, as 14, right? And then there are different sort of colors which are assigned to each and every container inside, right? So at palette 0, the color is white, which has been assigned. However, at palette 10, the color assigned is sort of a moss green shade, and maybe at palette 5, it's blue, whatever, right? So these are some of the things that are important for us to remember in terms of accessing the element names, talking about the length of the array, and also the values that it holds. So let's move on to our coding example and see how we can work it. Okay, so first things first, make sure that you have remixed your project here, which I've already done so, and you have given it a name. Okay, so before we kind of move forward with our coding example, what I want to go through is the things that we have just talked about, right? Like what does it look like to declare an array or create an array in our coding environment. So I think we can make good use of our console here. Let's just close it. Okay, so I think it's a good idea. Let's keep it a bit open. Okay, so here, let's say we talked about creating our own array, right? So maybe we can just call it let my array is, okay, so I've given it a name called my array. And since I've just put a square brackets, it knows that it is an array. But at this point in time, if you can see, it is saying undefined, which means that there are not many things associated to it. It doesn't know the length of the array. It doesn't know much about it. So it's just an empty array. Okay, and we can start putting some, basically, I'm gonna make, so we can start assigning sort of different values to it. So maybe let's just call it 18. And if you look at it at this point in time, if I say, because here, if you notice, I have given the name of the array, I've put in square brackets, and then I have put an index number inside, and I've assigned it a value, right? So what it is doing is it is saying, okay, so now if I check what my array looks like, it is saying 18. Why? Because that's what it knows so far. So at index 0, the value that has been assigned is 18, right? And it's just one. So let's try and add another one to it. Right now, let's just go one more. So far, it's undefined. Maybe call it 30. And now we have assigned this as well. So if I go and check again, so now you can look here that it is saying that the length of my array, or the array that we have at this point in time, is 2, which means that it is holding 2 variables at this point in time. So the first one is at 18. I mean, at 0 index, which is the first one, is holding the value 18, and the next one is 30, because that's what we have defined, right? Of course, you can assign as many variables as you want, but sometimes it can be also cumbersome if you're working with like repeatedly. Maybe if you're working with 50, you might not like assigning it like that. It's also too repetitive. So and there are also chances of error. So for instance, let's just say if we create another give variable at, I don't know, 8, right? Index 8. So we are saying that that is 20. Now that has been assigned. So now if I check here, what exactly my array holds is, if you can look, if you see this, it is saying that, okay, it has basically 9 variables inside. So the starting one first is 18, 30, and then there are 6 empty variables in between, and then the next one is 20. So this is something that we need to be mindful of when we are creating arrays and we are assigning sort of different values, because then we can sort of run into error when we are trying to pull these values. So just be mindful of these things that can happen in JavaScript. This is something just to show you. Also, another thing that if I am actually pulling this out right now, it's showing me that, okay, we are talking about, or how many variables exist in this one. Another way for us to check is also by saying something, my array.length. Okay, so now you can see that it has already started showing us 9. So what it basically means that I'm literally asking it to check the length of an array. And this dot syntax, if you look at it, is a bit different, something that we haven't worked with before. And this is going to come later when we start talking about objects and trying to learn about properties of objects. So this is what it is doing at this point in time. It's saying, okay, go to an array called my array, and then it is pointing to the length of that array and find that value out for me. That's all I'm saying in this one, right? So when I asked for, okay, the array.length, in this case, the name of the array was my array.length. So it spit out the number 9 because it's saying, okay, it holds 9 variables at this point in time. So this is kind of the things that we talked about. And now we can kind of start working from our for our example. So I've just closed it down. So yeah, so you know, your console can be very handy if you want to check out a few things, and that's just another way for you to sort of work it out. Okay, so what we know so far, for instance, is that we've been quite, this is something that we are sort of used to. It's assigning a single variable and then, you know, using that value of variable, let's say, to do something with it, right? So let's say in this case, I am saying, okay, create a circle which has 100 diameter, and use the variable that I've created here, use the value of this variable to as the position X for the circle that we have created, right? So this is something that we kind of know, but I'm going to comment this out. So let's try to do this not just for like single circle, but maybe a lots and lots of circles. So that's where we will start off with our array. So now that we have seen that we can declare a variable name and then start off with an empty array, for instance, okay? So I have put in square brackets. So I've just created an array and I've given it a name X, and I've said that, okay, for now it's empty. I'm going to assign the values later, but create an array for me. I've just called it X because we are going to use this array to define the X position of the many circles that we will create, okay? And let's do the same thing for Y position as well, right? So we can create an array for Y position as well. So now that we have, and again, this is just sort of two empty arrays that have been created for X and Y position of multiple circles that we are going to assign the values to. Okay, now that you know that we have just declared an array, and now we need to give an initial or assign an initial value to this set of arrays, right? So what we can do is we'll go to our setup function and we will try to assign a value. So if, let's say, it was easy, right? If it was a variable, we would say X is 10 and then, you know, we've assigned a value. But here, when we are talking about multiple variables, there is a slightly different syntax that we need to keep in mind. And this is where our for loop comes in handy. Why? Because the for loop will keep on going between the number of times as many circles we want to create. So let's say if it's 10, it's going to loop from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way till 9, you know, making it 10, and it's going to keep assigning for each and every circle. So loops and arrays are going to be quite good friends. So something that we need to remember. So first of all, let's go back and revise how the for loop syntax was. So remember, let I is 0. Okay, so if you remember, we were talking about like why do we write I for in our for loop is specifically because we are talking about index. So I is basically a short form for index. Of course, this is a variable name that can be assigned, but it's a sort of standard practice where we are referring to and calling it an I. Of course, it can be J, K, whatever you want, but mostly it's used for that, and it's simple enough for you to write as well. So something that that we talked about earlier. So okay, so for let I is 0, that means that we're starting our we've declared a variable and we've assigned it a value 0, and we are giving our condition. So as long as I is less than 100, you're going to keep on increasing by 1. So this is our for loop assignment condition and our change increment happening at the same time. And now we can actually start assigning the value to X. The difference is because it is an array, remember that we talked about if we have to give element names, we need 3 things. We need the name of the array, which in this case, first one is X. Then we need square brackets. And then within square brackets, we have to give the index number. Since we are working within a for loop, that means that it is going to go starting from the 0 and all the way to 99 to assign each and every one. We cannot give a hard-coded number 0 or 99 or whatever, right? So it has to loop, and the variable that we have already assigned here is I. So for index, we are going to put literally that variable inside. So now this is going to help us assign different sort of values, X values to each of the variable each of the 100 variables that we have created in our array. So let's give a random, let it pick up a random value for us. So for X, we have put pick any random value within the width of the canvas. And we can do the same way for our Y array as well. Okay, so that would be, wow. Okay, so that way we can actually do that for our Y value as well. Okay, so what we are saying is for X position, pick a random value as wide as our canvas is, and for Y position, pick any random value as long or tall or whatever the height of our canvas is, right? So now that we have, okay, so we have declared 2 empty variables. Now that we have also assigned values to each of these variables, I mean here arrays. We have declared 2 arrays. We have assigned values to both of these arrays now. Now we can actually move forward and try to use them in our circle, right, where we want to create them. So something like here. Okay, remember that the way we were working with the variable was that we could just literally pick that variable and use it in the position where we wanted it. It's going to be slightly different because again, we are talking about 100 variables here. So the way we have assigned values is the same way we are going to be trying to utilize it in our code. So we need for loop again, so that it can go through from first circle, second circle, and so on and so forth, up till all 100 circles that we are talking about. So again, we have our for loop here, and we're going to make use of, we're going to put our circle thing inside. We know that much, and we're going to come back to it in a bit. So again, let I is 0, then I is less than 100 in this case we are talking about, and then I plus plus. Okay, so in this for loop, what we will do, and I'm going to comment this out, there is a little bit of syntax that we need to think of. First of all, we have to place it in the X and Y position. So there are 2 arrays that we are talking about, but we have to go through each and every index number up till 0. We have to use this as the, we are going to use the element names, including all the index dynamically. So what we are doing here is, okay, great. So let's see if I exit page and let's refresh it. It seems like glitch is glitching at this point in time. Great. I think it should be okay. So we can start again. All right. So what we have done here is we have literally used whatever the name of the variables with the index number is dynamically, and we have put it in our X and Y position of our circle, and it has given us dynamically sort of, I have to refresh it because, right, so depending on my canvas size, it is taking up different X and Y values and assigning and creating different circles for me. Okay, so far this kind of all makes sense. The difference is that we can make it more dynamic. Why? Because by we, I mean our computer program precisely knows about each and every different location, and we can make use of this coordinate X and Y position as well to do something for us, right? So these are just created at this point in time, but we can either move them around or we can have, you know, fun with them. So let's try and use our mouse's position to impact the size of the circle depending on how close or how far it is from our cursor. So imagine if a circle is closer to my mouse, then make the circle size smaller. If the farther away it is, the bigger it is, something like that. Okay, so what that means is that in this case, we need to know a couple of things. When we are talking about how far or how close it is, it means that we need to understand, or we need to have a system where we can calculate the distance between the mouse and each of these circles, right? It's not one circle, it's each of these 100 circles, because it is going to be changing and impacting the size of the circle. So there is a good, interesting function which is called, literally it's going to help us here, it's going to help us calculate the distance. So what it does is basically it calculates the distance between 2 points, right? So we know that for each point we need to know x and y position, and for the second point we need to know the x and y position of that point as well. So I'm going to just put it here just for our reference. So we know that the dist function will hold 4 parameters. So x1, y1, which is the x and y position of the first point, and then x2 and y2 of the second point, right? So in this case, if we are talking about the x and y position of the circle and the x and y position of our mouse, right? So we are trying to calculate the distance between the two. And since we want that to be impacting the size of our circle, that means that we need to make this hard-coded 100 pixels into a variable so that it can keep on changing the value. So let's just make it d, and that means that I need to assign a variable d, and then within this variable I will use this function, right? So then it can calculate whatever distance it is calculating between the x and y position of my mouse and the x and y position of the circle. That will be then fed into the variable d, which is actually used to represent the diameter of the circle. So the x and y position in this case, first of all, we know that we are talking about mouse x and mouse y, right? So that bit we know. The other position x and y of the circle, again, we are talking about lots and lots of circles, like we are talking about all the circles, right? So it needs to calculate the distance to each and every circle, circle's x and y position. So that means that we are going to literally use the x and y position of all of these circles and feed that into our variable d. Okay, so let's see. So now you can start seeing that wherever my mouse is, the closer it is, the circles are smaller, the farther away they are, the bigger they are. If you want to make it a bit more, I don't know, have a little bit more of distance and space. So now you can perhaps see it a bit more visually. Yeah, so this is what it is doing, right? So that means that we are not tied to like one kind of position. We can literally use each and every x and y position of our circle individually and make it work for us. So that's one thing. Another thing that we can actually look into, okay, so right now these are all just like all sort of like white bubbles happening. What if we want to add some sort of colors in it? And maybe we want to add colors, to assign different sort of colors to each of these circles. And how can we kind of go about it? So first of all, we know, well, is that we need to have some kind of, and I'm going to comment this out for now, but we have to put something in our fill function here, right? To make it all colorful. Of course, if I'm going to use like a single color, that's something that we can do. So if I end up using a single color, that means it looks like a big black blob, of course. If you do a gray, but the idea is that you can see it, right? Like this is just one color which is assigned to all the 100 circles that we have created. But what if we wanted to have more, right? Here again, what comes in handy is an array. So let's try and create another array. Remember our color palette that we were talking about? So let's like literally get ourselves a palette so that we can fill it with different sort of colors that we want, and then that we can use it to color all these bubbles or circles, right? So here, let's say we've created a palette. Okay, maybe first of all, let's try and assign sort of different values. You know, it can take hexadecimal values, so that means that is can take up up to 6 places, going from A to F and from 0 to 9. So let's try and make up some colors, whatever they might look like, and then we will work with them. So I don't know, I'm just putting 2 colors in for now to see. I don't even know what the colors might look like. And then, because right now we are talking about 100 colors, 100 circles, right? and we've only given 2 colors to it. So we'll create another variable, another array, from where we can actually pull colors from our array palette, and then we will try to put it into our circles. Okay, so we have this, and now this is an empty array. We will try to assign some sort of color values to the entirety of all the circles that we have so far. And because we have given maybe a good starting point would be to see if that can right now I've just assigned this first value, right? Like the first at index 0. So if I do this and then I change this, and in our fill function, maybe use colors, whatever it is picking up. So it is some shade of green, right? So it has actually filled all the colors now with 1. But instead of doing this, maybe what we can do is assign a random value. Well, so random in this case is that it's going to pick up one of the 2, but we could have added like more, 3 or 4. Oh, wow. So you can see that it has randomly assigned each of these. What if you wanted to have like more and you don't want to keep on assigning sort of like different colors into it? There is an interesting site from where you can actually pick colors. So if you have been a little bit into graphic design or something, you know, you can always find different color palettes which are available online. And one of an interesting site is Coolers for now. And if we go to this site, we can use some existing color palettes. So that means that we don't need to work with creating our own palettes. We can like literally pull them off of the website. So let's have a look at some of these trending palettes and see which are coming up. Okay, so we have a range of all these palettes, and wherever my mouse is, you can see that it's even showing me the hexadecimal value for all of them. We can literally pick any of these. So let's I don't know, let's go with something super okay, so here, if you can see, there is a way of exporting palette, and it gives you so many different options. We need to work with them in our code. So we'll try and see how it works. So if you can see, it is giving you an option in an array format as well. That is really helpful for us. So we can literally pick this and copy it. And I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 basically colors we are actually pulling from them. And here I can actually replace them. The difference is that here it doesn't have sort of hashtag. So since these are not like 100 and 200 and whatever, I can literally add hashtags to it. And you can start seeing the minute I keep adding hashtag to it, the computer starts recognizing it. So those colors start to get added as well. So yeah, so now we have basically all of the colors that very pastel shades that we have. We can work around. Maybe if we don't want, we can like literally do a no stroke here, and then see that we have all of this happening in the background. And now you can see it literally feels like some birthday balloons or bubbles. The closer my mouse is, the smaller they are. Farther away, the bigger they are in size. I can format this file. So yeah, so just check these out and see how these arrays work for you. A good thing to remember is that, you know, arrays and for loops are sort of friends, so they kind of work hand in hand, and they're quite helpful for us. And yeah, so I'll see you in the next video.